This is Mr. Supon with First Take, One Cut, No Edit, Low Pixel Productions. Chapter 5, Part 2, The Patriarchs. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and bowed in worship, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, near the end of his life, spoke of the exodus of the Israelites and gave instructions about his bones. That's from the New Testament book, Hebrews 11:21-22. That is so interesting. So Jacob, his name was changed to Israel. When he was dying, he bowed down in worship, leaning on the top of his staff. That wooden staff is symbolic of the cross. The support of the cross strengthened him. Now, this is interesting because Joseph asked that his bones be taken away. Why would that be important? That would be important because he knew that the Jewish people would be fulfilling Exodus, which is exiting, right? So that his bones would be taken out because they were exiting that area. That is so amazing. He knew it. That was prophetic. We're going to look at Joseph today, right? So first of all, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. Now it's time for Joseph to step up. His trials and problems and tribulations, they're just going to bless him. He's going to take those and they're going to make him a better person, improved person. So here we go. Let's pick up Isaac and Rebekah. They have twins. So Jacob was born second. But in the story, he grabs the heel of Esau, right? And that's going to be symbolic because later on, Esau ends up selling his birthright for a bowl of stew. So Esau is hungry. And Jacob, who is a patriarch, remember all the characters in the Bible, their weaknesses are revealed. And Jacob was one they call the deceiver. He was a trickster. Chapter 42. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued. "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." That's amazing, right? Typical dad. Why do you keep looking at yourselves? Why do you look at each other? I love that. In verse 6, now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. When Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. So we know in this story that Joseph was sold by his brothers to a caravan, and then they sold him to the Egyptians. And God blessed him and lifted him up on high. And now his brothers are coming back to him, and they're bowing down to him, which this is fulfilled. Joseph had a prophecy that they would bow down to him. That's one of the reasons that they were mad at him, because of his dreams. Now in verse 8. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," they answered. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are the sons of one man, your servant, are honest men, not spies." That is amazing, isn't it? In verse 13, but they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." One is no more. In verse 14, Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you. You are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here." Now, why was Joseph testing his brothers? Because he wanted the whole family to end up in Egypt. And actually, that was God's plan, for everyone to end up in Egypt and to be fed, because the only food that remained in that whole area was in Egypt. Let's pick up Isaac and Rebekah. They have twins. So Jacob was born second. But in the story, he grabs the heel of Esau, right? And that's going to be symbolic because later on, Esau ends up selling his birthright for a bowl of stew. So Esau is hungry. And Jacob, who was a patriarch, remember all the characters in the Bible, their weaknesses are revealed. And Jacob was one they call the deceiver. He was a trickster. Anyway, let's look at Joseph, one of his sons. A little on Joseph. His father made him a multicolored tunic, and the brothers were jealous of him. They were so jealous because of all the stories also that Joseph told them about his dreams, how his brothers would bow down to him. So they actually put him down in a cave. And they were going to kill him, but they decided not to. So they sold him into slavery to a caravan of gypsies. The caravan actually sold him into Egypt. Due to the providence of God, he was raised up because he could actually tell what the dreams meant to the Pharaoh. So they raised him up right under the Pharaoh, and he was in charge. He also found a way to help the Egyptians and the Jews not to starve to death. It was his idea, which he explains came from God. And here's later on, he would meet his brothers. In the beginning, they didn't recognize him. And here shows that his dream said the brothers would bow down to him. And that's exactly what happened. Let's pick up in the story in Genesis 45. When Joseph was in Egypt, his brothers came to meet him, but they did not know who he was. He was dressed in Egyptian clothing. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. Now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land. For the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." We know that the Messiah comes through Judah. If Judah dies because of this famine, the Messiah is stopped. So the whole link of the Messiah from Adam to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, down through Judah to King David to Mary, has to remain alive. In verse 8, "So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, ruler of Egypt." That is amazing. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, "This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all of Egypt. Come down to me and don't delay." Now here in verse 14, "Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them after his brothers talked with him." So there was a great reunion. In verse 25, "So they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him, 'Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt.' Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, 'I'm convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die.'" That's Genesis chapter 45. Now Judah's in the Messianic line. There is Judah in Hebrew. How does it go? Yud, Hey, Vav, Dalet, Hey. That is Judah. There it is, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ, the Lion of Judah. In the book of Revelation, Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and that comes from Genesis 49. If Judah dies, the Messiah stopped, but Joseph saves his brothers. That is the theme, the moral of this story. Now let's look at the patriarchs from Abraham to Joseph. This is a summary right here. Pay attention. Abraham and Sarah were married and living in Ur of Mesopotamia. God called Abram and Sarah to leave their people and start a new type of people based on faith in God. Faith is a gift freely given by those to be able to understand God's revelation. Hebrews 11:1 says, faith is assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Romans 4:1-3 says, what then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh, has found? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. God would change Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah, after he declares that a covenant between them is established, and Abraham believes God. So it's all about belief and faith. The physical sign of the Abrahamic covenant is circumcision on the 8th day. A covenant is an unconditional commitment which lasts a lifetime. Some people confuse contracts with covenants, but contracts are only a temporary, conditional arrangement. Circumcision was a sign only because salvation comes through faith in God. Isaac is the promised son through faith. Abraham believed that God would bless him and all generations through Isaac, which means laughter in Hebrew. So the name Isaac or Yitzhak means laughter in Hebrew. Abraham and Sarah would have their faith tested because they could not have children. They were getting old, and Isaac was born at the old age. Isaac marries Rebekah, and they had twins named Esau and Jacob. During birth, Esau came out first, with Jacob grabbing his heel. This would be symbolic and prophetic because later Esau would sell his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of food. These events in the Torah have much significance in the spiritual sense. Here it is, guys. Allegorical, moral, anagogical. They reveal insight to the meaning. Jacob had an experience of a lifetime when he wrestled with God and received a blessing. God changed his name to Israel, and he became the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. Every Jewish person knew which tribe they were from until 70 AD, when Solomon's temple was completely destroyed by the Romans. Throughout the entire Old Testament, the 12 tribes of Israel are mentioned, and the New Testament book of Revelation reveals that they are symbolic of the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ. So Jacob had several children and gave his favorite son Joseph a multicolored tunic. The other brothers would become jealous after Joseph's many dreams, and they actually sold him into slavery after deciding not to kill him. He ended up in Egypt and rose in power due to God's hand on his life. Genesis chapters 37-50 record the entire story of Joseph. There are so many events in Joseph's life in which the literal sense and spiritual sense come alive. Joseph was not liked by his brothers, was mocked by his family, was sold with the price of a slave, was not recognized at first, provided much food, bread for his people, etc., etc. And who does this match up to? It matches up to Jesus. So Joseph's life, literally speaking, matches up to Jesus' life, spiritually speaking. All right, so the first book of the Torah, called Genesis, finishes with Jacob's blessing over his 12 sons, and Judah receiving a special prophetic blessing. There we go, Judah, the lion of the tribe of Judah. And this blessing points to the Messiah. Judah is one of the 12 sons who is in the Messianic line, which begins with Adam, then Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then through Judah. Many years later, after the period of the judges and Samson, the Jewish people are given kings. The second king of Israel is King David, who is in the Messianic line. King David wrote many psalms and prophecies about the Messiah. The Messianic line goes through the Virgin Mary, who gave birth to the Messiah, right? 800 years before Jesus was born, Isaiah 7:14 declared, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son. She will name him Emmanuel." Jesus is called Emmanuel, which means God is with us. That's it. Thank you for being the best audience ever. This is First Take One Cut, No Edit, Low Pixel Productions, Part 2.